Hello, my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK hobby importers and distributors. Welcome to episode 2 of this history of strategic aerial bombing. Just as the First World War was coming to an end, a massive Allied bombing system came into operation, known as the Inter-Allied Independent Air Force, still commanded by Hugh Trenchard, with British, French, Italian and US bombing forces all combined to smash Germany in a foretaste of the combined bombing offensive of World War II. This literally only lasted a couple of months before disbandment in late November 1918, and the Royal Air Force's Independent Air Force was disbanded early in 1919, so there would be no more use for these behemoths of the skies, and the world could go back to peace. The massive RAF V1500 were used for long-distance flying testing, including mine operations over Kabul in Afghanistan in 1919, bringing to the end the Third Anglo-Afghan War. Its endurance of 14 hours with a 7,500-pound bomb load, about 10,000 foot of altitude, and just under 100 miles an hour was impressive for the time, but it was a little bit more than the Royal Air Force needed in peacetime. So the V1500 was replaced by the Vickers Vimy in 1919, an aircraft smaller and somewhat cheaper, but could still fly distances, including the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic by Alcock and Brown in 1919, beating an RAF V1500, which had broken down. With the UK spending little on defence in the 1920s, the Vickers Vimy stayed in service with the RAF until 1933. In Italy, one of the fascist black shirt leaders, Italia Balbo, would continue the Italian passion for long-distance flights. Early Italians had flown from Rome to Tokyo in 1920, obviously staged, and in 1925, a 55,000 kilometre stage flight from Rome to Australia, then to Tokyo and back to Rome. Balbo did not learn to fly until the late 1920s and was appointed Minister for the Air by Mussolini in 1929, and he led 24 seaplanes from Rome to Chicago, Illinois. Balbo then flew his wing down to New York, where he was invited to lunch by President Roosevelt. A street in Chicago is still named after him today, and a memorial stands across from Soldiers Field. And even today, large formations of aircraft are still referred to as a Balbo. Balbo returned to Italy as the new Marshal of the Air Force, and by the time of World War II, he was governor of Libya, but was shot down and killed in an Italian SM-79 bomber by Italian AA gunners who mistook him for a British bomber. With all the flying around the world and aircraft and cheering crowds and flying flags, others in the 1920s saw this as a military opportunity and gave rise to the Bomber Mafia, and the bomber would always get through. Bomber technology did not really improve in the 1920s and the early 1930s, with bombers no faster and flying no further and carrying no more bombs than late World War I types, mainly due to the cash-strapped militaries of that period during the Great Depression. Even though large civilian airliners, including flying boats, were flying vast distances and improving. One upcoming Royal Air Force officer was then Squadron Leader Arthur Harris, who at the start of World War I was in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, with his local regiment as a basic bugler. He came to the UK among 300 Rhodesian volunteers, where he gained entry into the Royal Flying Corps as a second lieutenant. He had a distinguished service in World War I as a pilot, where he became an ace and then attained the rank of major. After the war, he stayed in with the newly formed Royal Air Force and served overseas, where he first became interested in bombing. In the Middle East, they flew Bristol fighters, or FB-2s, and other bombers. This is where Harris thought of using transport aircraft and rigged them to carry more bombs with longer range, and developed bombing techniques. These were used against Turkish and Arab rebels. Harris stated he could totally flatten a large village in 45 minutes and kill most of its inhabitants, and send a message to others with little use of ground forces. This was called air policing. In the USA in 1925, General Billy Mitchell was court-martialed after pushing the priority of the air service and after the battleship sinking test, but was kept writing doctrine on the future of air powers. Some of this was picked up by other officers, many serving in the Air Corps Technical School, the ACTS, even though the bombers did not yet exist, but a bomb sight did, and the theory of daylight precision bombing was being pushed by the likes of George and his former students Hansel, Wilson and Kula. The Italian Doet went down another route with the theory of area indiscriminate terror bombing to kill the civilian population and collapse morale. Other US officers, such as Claire Chennault, argued against these theories, going for fighter bombers and lighter tactical bombers to help ground forces, plus effective pursuit aircraft or fighter aircraft to kill off the enemy bombers. Officers, though, like Chennault, were sidelined, and the so-called Bomber Mafia got more powerful in the 1930s, and the theory of strategic bombing spread throughout the developed world, with the likes of the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK at the time, Stanley Baldwin, stating in 1932, "The bomber will always get through." With the rise of the Nazis in the mid-1930s and the Japanese rattling the cages in the Far East, bomber design would go into full swing, with fighters as a secondary thought. The Germans thought of the bomber in a tactical way of supporting ground forces in the advance, but it would lead the way in terror bombing along with the Japanese in 1937. By the mid-1930s, the US Army Air Corps Martin B-10 bomber was in service, that was faster than any fighter of the day, and by 1935, Boeing Model 299 that would become the B-17 Flying Fortress took its first test flight, and by 1938 was in US Army Air Corps service. The B-17 was a massive step, the most advanced bomber in the world by a country mile. Its top speed was close to 300 miles an hour, a cruising speed of close to 200 miles an hour, a range of over 2,000 miles with 6,000 pounds of bombs and an altitude close to 30,000 feet, and armed with a good number of heavy machine guns, and many more later. The B-17, coupled with the Norden Bomb Sight, in development since the 1920s, now coupled with an autopilot system, gave the Bomber Mafia their tool for daylight precision bombing. In 1936, the British movie Things to Come, set in a normal world of the day in a future 1940, starts with an aerial bombing attack on a fictitious southern city and its total destruction. The movie was very, very popular and disturbing, but was seen by a number of characters, including a certain Adolf Hitler, who, it is told, ordered Goering to use it as its inspiration for the new Luftwaffe attacks, and the British government of the day an inspiration for appeasement. Also in the 1930s, the Royal Air Force formed a Bomber Command, with its fleet of bombers that were already, unfortunately, obsolete and could not put a light to the new US B-17. In 1936, though, the first flight of the Vickers Wellington would take place, and by 1938 it would also be in service with the Royal Air Force, at least an half-decent bomber, and it would serve well throughout World War II. With rearmament in full swing by 1937, new designs for larger bombers were on the drawing boards, such as Halifax and Stirling. 1937 was a critical year for the world. It would see the start of rearmament by the West, slowly at first, but speeding up, very, very quick. The Nazis were in full and total power, and the Japanese, they were on the prowl in the Far East. And the League of Nations left impudent when in 1937 the Japanese attacked China from Manchuria. The Japanese had developed bombers, though not massive, had good range and speed, and these were put to use, terror bombing the Chinese in cities such as Nanjing, Shanghai, Nantou and Canton, resulting in the deaths of thousands in brutal, indiscriminate bombing. Just before the Japanese attack in China, in Spain from 1936, was the start of a brutal civil war between the right-wing nationalists under Franco and the Republicans who at the time held democratic power in Spain. By 1937, the war had become vicious and brutal, with the nationalists getting support from Nazi Germany and the Italian fascists, and the Republicans getting support from the Soviet Union and the International Brigade. Germany sent the Condor Legion of German volunteers equipped with the very latest German aircraft. In April 1937, a large force of bombers and escorting fighters led by mad Nazi Colonel Wolfram von Richthofen headed towards the Basque city of Guernica. This was to teach the Basques a lesson and destroy morale before the nationalist ground force could attack the city. And it would be the very first time mass indiscriminate bombing would be used in the world. The raid carried out by the Condor Legion and the Italian Aviation Legionnaire flying aircraft familiar to those interested in World War II. Italian SM-79 bombers, Fiat CR-42 fighters, plus German Do-17 and HE-111 bombers, supported by early versions of the Bf-109, plus Ju-87 Stukas and Ju-52s. The attacking force were following the theories of Italian duet, mass bombing to shatter the defences and collapse the morale of the civilian population and cause mass panic. And that's exactly what happened. And the nationalist forces quickly took the city. No one really knows how many were killed, upwards maybe 2,000, 500 at the lower end. But whatever the figure, it shocked the Western world, leading to protests in the world's press and the famous painting by Picasso, The Bombing of Guernica. It also gave a terrible foretaste of things to come. In the next episode, we shall look at the aerial bombing in the early years of World War II.